Thank you for joining us today. I wanted to note for all media in attendance that received our materials before this presser, the embargo is now lifted. We're here on behalf of the Arms Embargo Now campaign. We are a coalition of over 400 civil society organizations advocating to stop Canadian arms from fueling Israel's genocide in Gaza. We're here today to release a new report that documents the U.S. loophole in Canada's laws regulating the trade of military goods. Speaking today will be Rachel Small from World Beyond War, Haneen Ismail from Palestinian Youth Movement, and myself, Alex Paterson from Canadians for Justice and Peace in the Middle East, and MP Jenny Kwan, sponsor of Bill C-233, the No More Loopholes Act. I now turn it over to Rachel.
My name is Rachel Small. I'm the Canada lead for World Beyond War, a global organization and movement to end war and establish a just and sustainable peace. Despite the recent purported ceasefire, the bombs have not stopped falling. Israel has continued its relentless bombardment and occupation of Gaza and ongoing campaign of assassinations and displacements of Palestinians in the West Bank. And for over 2 years now, people across this country have taken action against this genocide. We have organized some of the largest anti-war demonstrations in Canadian history. We've emailed, called, and met with our elected officials. We've told the media harrowing stories of this violence, which has killed tens of thousands of Palestinians and destroyed over 85% of Gaza's infrastructure. And a concrete and urgent demand has resounded for the Canadian government to impose a comprehensive two-way arms embargo on Israel. This call has been amplified by the Arms Embargo Now coalition, an alliance of nearly 500 endorsing organizations representing millions of people across this country, including Canada's largest unions, faith institutions, human rights and advocacy groups, and Palestinian-led organizations. Despite this overwhelming public pressure, and despite polling data repeatedly showing that a majority of Canadians support the demand for an arms embargo, the Canadian government has chosen instead to mislead the public. For over 2 years now, politicians have tried to sell the lie that Canada's role in this genocide is minimal, has been addressed, or doesn't exist. This is the context in which we're here today to release a new report authored by the Palestinian Youth Movement, World Beyond War, Canadians for Justice and Peace in the Middle East, and the Arms Embargo Now coalition that reveals that Canada is indeed still making and shipping key parts of both Israel's most destructive warplane and the bombs it is still dropping. Let me be clear on this point. Despite our government's attempts to placate us, to create the illusion of having addressed Canada's arming of Israel's attacks, we see now that Canadian-made military goods have continued to flow to Israel this entire time, indeed bypassing all export controls in Canada by flowing through the U.S. They are directly supporting Israel's capacity to carry out war crimes in Gaza and maintain its occupation of Palestine. Over a year ago, then Foreign Affairs Minister Mélanie Joly promised that Canada wouldn't have any arms or parts of arms be sent to Gaza, including 3 indirect pathways, she specified. And just 3 months ago, when we confronted the government with evidence that Canada's shipments of arms to Israel had indeed continued through 2024 and 2025, the new Minister of Foreign Affairs, Anita Anand, acknowledged the ongoing shipment of arms to Israel, but claimed that Canadian military exports to Israel were somehow not being used in Gaza. She reassured the public that the Canadian government, and I quote, would not allow Canadian-made weapons to fuel this conflict in any way. And she claimed they were cutting off permits for any arms that could be used in Gaza. Despite these repeated claims that Canada had stopped sending the weapons that Israel was using in Gaza, This report launched today demonstrates a continuous flow of hundreds of shipments of Canadian military goods directly to the key U.S. factories making Israel's bombs and military aircraft. While Palestinian families buried their children under the rubble of Canadian armed airstrikes, the government turned our ports, our airlines, our highways into a covert military transport service, using them to literally ship TNT to the giant US bomb factories producing Israel's munitions, all while telling Canadians they had stopped arms exports to Israel and we had nothing to worry about. This investigation continues to expose one of the biggest propaganda campaigns in Canadian foreign policy in decades. The government's pause on issuing arms export permits was largely a semantic exercise designed to fool the public, while ensuring Israeli weapons manufacturers never lost access to Canadian military goods. The Canadian government knew all along that the majority of Canada's ongoing exports of arms to Israel didn't even need a permit from Canada because they conveniently used the US loophole to travel to Israel via the US. This isn't bureaucratic oversight. This is systematic deception that has made Canada directly complicit in what most scholars and organizations worldwide agree is a genocide. Today, we have once again caught the Canadian government red-handed in its lies. And so now the government once again has an important choice to make. Either they can continue to try to deceive the public, to issue empty statements about the need to take action while they continue to allow weapons to ship, or they can end Canada's role in this machinery of death by immediately imposing a complete two-way arms embargo on Israel and by addressing the huge loopholes in Canadian arms export laws that allow these weapons to travel untracked and without permits to the US en route to Israel. Thank you, and now I will invite up Haneen Ismail to speak.
Good morning. My name is Haneen Ismail, and I'm an organizer with the Palestinian Youth Movement. I'm here today speaking for a community that feels completely betrayed by this government's empty promises. 3.5 months ago, we stood in this very building and released a report with damning evidence that Canadian-made military parts were still reaching Israel. We hoped that confronting the government with this truth would finally force him to act with humanity. But here we are again. The report we're releasing today provides thousands of data points of evidence to demonstrate a fatal flaw in the Canadian arms export system, the US loophole. Because of special agreements we've made with the United States, Canadian companies can ship military-grade components to the United States without permits and therefore without any traces. This is not a mistake. It's a built-in way for the government to continually claim innocence while its weapon trade continues to go through the United States unchecked. The US is Israel's primary weapon supplier, giving it billions of dollars every single year in military aid. Canada often tries to make its role look small by saying it only issued a few permits to Israel, and that those permits are now suspended. But our report shows something much more serious. Canada has been playing a major role in helping the United States arm Israel. We make key parts that go into American weapons used by Israel and also act as a transport route for explosives coming from overseas that are sent through Canada to US factories, where they are then turned into the very bombs that Israel has been dropping on Gaza nonstop. Our new report released this morning proves exactly how this loophole is being used. It maps out step by step the entire supply chain, showing how Canada remains deeply involved in Israel's continuous assault on Gaza. Here's the data that we found. First, we were able to uncover dozens of shipments of F-35 parts being transported from Canada to the US and then just days later to Israel. The F-35 is described as the most lethal fighter jet in the world and has been used extensively in Israel's military campaign in Gaza. In one instance, an F-35 was used to drop three 2,000-pound bombs in an attack on a designated safe zone, killing 90 Palestinians and injuring over 300 more. When one of these bombs explodes, it creates a fireball thousands of degrees hot, carves a crater of over 15 meters wide, and blasts lethal fragments of metals over 300 meters in every single direction. There are millions of dollars of Canadian-made parts in every single F-35 shipments that is used in Israel to bomb Gaza. We also tracked 360 shipments that are going to Lockheed Martin's F-35 assembly in Texas. In fact, as of November 2025, the US sent about 45 fighter jets to Israel and is expected to receive 40 more in the next 4 years. But our research doesn't end at aircraft parts. We also tracked Canadian-made explosives that are used to fire the bombs that Israel has been dropping on Gaza again and again. We documented 150 shipments of Canadian explosives from the General Dynamics facility in Quebec to US Army ammunition plants that manufacture those 2,000-pound bombs that are sent to Israel. The 155 artillery shell made with these materials can kill anyone within 50 meters of the blast and injure people up to 100 meters away. To be very, very clear, the Valleyfield plant in Quebec is the North American sole supplier of the propellant type M31A that are used to fire the hundreds of thousands of artillery shells that Israel has used in Gaza. The impact of a single shell is catastrophic. It unleashes a blast wave so powerful that it can kill a crew inside an armored vehicle just with that violent shockwave, without even creating a dent on the armor. The shell's thick steel casing then rips apart into thousands of high-velocity fragments, shredding anyone nearby into tiny pieces and turning buildings into rubble. Finally, our investigation shows that Canada isn't just manufacturing weapons. We're also a major international transit hub. Since October 2023, we traced over 400 shipments of TNT made in Poland that passed through the port of Saguenay, Quebec. From there, they were trucked across our highways to the same US plants that used that TNT to build various bombs that Israel has been dropping on Gaza. The 2,000-pound Mk-84 bomb made with this TNT can kill anyone within 300 meters of radius and can smash through 11 feet of concrete. Over 14,000 of these bombs were transferred to Israel since October 2023. To be clear about the scale of this devastation, the atomic bomb that destroyed Hiroshima was about 12 kilotons. The explosive force dropped in Gaza is now estimated to be over 200 kilotons. This is more than 16 times greater than Hiroshima. And it's being unleashed upon men, women, and children living in one of the most condensed areas on the planet. And Canada is directly enabling this through its industry and its infrastructure. So while the government keeps insisting that permits are frozen and weapons aren't being shipped to be used in Gaza, the evidence shows the opposite. Canadian weapons manufacturers are not just involved, they are essential to Israel's war machine. These are not isolated cases. The evidence in this report clearly links the Canadian industry to the ongoing assault in Gaza and the West Bank. None of this is a policy mistake. This has been and continues to be a deliberate effort to mislead Canadians. Canada's supposed clear stance on not fueling the conflict that former Prime Minister Trudeau, Foreign Minister Joly, that current Prime Minister Carney, and Foreign Affairs Anand keep referencing is a bald-faced lie. Canada's role in Gaza's destruction isn't a matter of opinion. It is written plainly in these shipping records. If more than 90,000 dead Palestinians is not enough for a government to end its complicity in Gaza, then what will it take? Thank you. I will pass it on to Deputy Jenny Kwan.
No, it's actually going over to me.
Alex.
Yeah. So again, my name's Alex Paterson, and I'm spokesperson for Canadians for Justice and Peace in the Middle East. Last week, CJPME released another report that estimated, based on the public health evidence to date, that as many as 298,000 Palestinians have been killed by Israel's operations as of October 19th, 2025, with roughly 96,100 being directly killed by Israeli bombs and bullets. We also projected that it is reasonable to infer that roughly 20% of the Palestinian population in Gaza will die by 2030 because of Israel's blockade and siege without Canadian intervention from itself and its allies. These are grim statistics that illustrate the real-life impact of Canada's intentionally flawed arms control system. Many of these aforementioned bombs had Canadian components in them. The report we are jointly releasing reveals how these arms are getting to Israel through the U.S. loophole. It exposes that despite supposedly barring direct transfers of some weaponry to Israel in January 2024, that the U.S. loophole is so significant that Canada can continue to arm a military committing genocide without triggering any real alarm bells in government. This points to the system being designed this way. It's rigged to support geopolitical interest over human rights. Most of Canada's public response to the crisis of Canadian weapons being used in Gaza hung on the distinction between lethal versus non-lethal arms or offensive versus defensive weapons. What this report reveals is that Canada continued to send essential components for both lethal and offensive systems through the U.S. loophole, despite claiming to have paused the approval of all lethal exports for use in Gaza. In particular, artillery and missile launcher parts are glaring examples of Canadians' complicity in the bombardment of Gaza snuck through the U.S. loophole. All of this is happening because parts of the Arms Trade Treaty were made domestic law in 2018 to 2019. At that time, the Trudeau government omitted crucial articles from the treaty. And then, in addition, GAC went ahead and wrote itself a regulation that exempts the majority of Canada's exports to the U.S. from the provisions of the Arms Trade Treaty that did happen to be included in our Export and Import Permits Act. For the majority of weapons we do regulate when sent to the U.S., GAC also issued General Permit number 47 for 2 out of those 3 categories, thus again using regulations to enhance the free flow of unregulated weapons rather than actually implement the Arms Trade Treaty. The U.S. loophole is created by the Export Control List, a regulation under the Export and Import Permits Act that determines which weapons are subject to the permit system. It means that most weapons exports to the U.S. do not require company-based permits, and that means they are not assessed for risk before being sold. This is the antithesis of our commitments we made by signing the Arms Trade Treaty. When we signed the Arms Trade Treaty, we made a commitment to prevent our weapons from being used in genocide and crimes against humanity, with no loopholes and no exceptions. It appears that instead, this government has a lot of loopholes and a lot of exemptions in mind when committing to follow international law. The government has known for some time that Canadian-made weapons were still reaching Israel. The U.S. loophole has simply functioned as the way government feigns ignorance and misinforms the public about the nature of our military trade. This government continues under Carney to choose profits of armed companies over the very existence of a Palestinian people in Gaza. The Gaza Strip is essentially a pile of rubble with people living in post-apocalyptic conditions. In no small part because of Canadian-made arms. Our country is out of balance, and Carney is selling us that regulatory capture by arms companies is the route to renewed prosperity. He's asking us to sacrifice Canadian values to do it. Human rights are at the core of who we're supposed to be. Instead, we need to look to Private Members Bill C-233, proposed by MP Jenny Kwan, as a way to restore some semblance of accountability for the war profiteers based in Canada. We owe Palestinians nothing less. We owe it to every single one of the 96,000 souls the Canadian-made weapons helped slaughter. Jenny?
Well, thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. I'm happy to join with civil society organizations here today who are part of the Arms Embargo Now. Today's report lays bare an alarming truth. Canada's arms control system is broken, and our government's loopholes are allowing Canadian-made weapons and components to fuel atrocities abroad, including in Gaza. It is literally jaw-dropping to see the brazen impunity by which Canadian arms are being sent to conflict zones without legitimate oversight. The supply chain needs to have a light shined on it, and that is what this report is doing. And as parliamentarians, we have a moral and legal obligation to ensure that Canadian weapons never contribute to war crimes, crimes against humanity, or genocide. Yet this report shows that Canada is clearly failing that obligation. That is also why I tabled my private member's bill, Bill C-233, to close the U.S. loophole. It is up for second reading debate on Wednesday evening, and I call on all members of the House to support this legislation. Canada claims to uphold the United Nations Arms Trade Treaty, but our domestic laws leave out key provisions, creating dangerous gaps. We never adopted Article 4, which would require Canada to treat weapons, parts, and components with the same scrutiny as full weapon systems. We left out Article 6, which clearly prohibits arms transfers where there is a serious risk that they be used in genocide or war crimes. By omitting these articles, the Liberal government has left itself discretion to prioritize politics and profits over human rights. And perhaps most troubling, Canada has built what this report and many others call the U.S. loophole. Because of outdated regulations and the Defense Production Sharing Agreement, most arms exports to the United States don't require a permit at all. That means they are unregulated, untracked, and unaccountable. These components are then incorporated into U.S. weapons systems, including F-35 fighter jets and 2,000-pound bombs sent onto countries like Israel, where they're used against civilians. So when the government claims it is, quote, paused arms permits to Israel, it is deeply misleading. The vast majority of Canadian arms reaching Israel never required a permit in the first place. The National Court of Justice has found plausible evidence of genocide in Gaza. Despite that, Canadian-made components continue to flow into weapons systems used to bomb Gaza's homes, hospitals, and schools. Let's be clear. Once a Canadian-made F-35 part or explosive leaves our borders, whether directly or through the United States, Canada loses all control over how it's used. The Liberal government can no longer claim ignorance or distance. This is complicity through design enabled by a system full of deliberate loopholes. That must end. And that's why I'm calling on the government to take action immediately and to support my private member's bill, Bill C-233, the No More Loopholes Act. It'll be up for second reading debate tomorrow. It'll be voted on in February by members of the House. And I call on all Canadians to get behind this legislation and contact your member of parliament if you want this loophole to close. The current system undermines Canada's standing in the international community. The evidence is overwhelming. The moral case is undeniable. Canada cannot claim to stand for human rights while our factories and ports send parts of weapons raining down destruction on Gaza. This is not just about policy. It is about accountability and fulfilling our human rights obligations. The government must act now to close the loopholes that allow Canadian complicity in war crimes. Anything less is a betrayal of Canada's long-standing history of standing up for human rights. Last but not least, my direct message to members of Parliament. We have the privilege to be in this place, to do something for Canadians. Exercise that right. You have that authority to make a difference in the global stage, to save lives, and to make sure Canada respect basic human rights and abide by the Arms Trade Treaty. Please vote yes for Bill C-233, the No More Loopholes Act. Thank you.
Thank you, MP Kwan. As you have heard today, the evidence of Canadian complicity facilitated by the U.S. loophole is both crystal clear and morally damning. The U.S. loophole must be closed, and the government has two choices before it. Will they impose an immediate arms embargo on Israel? Further, will the government support Bill C-233 tomorrow when it has its first hour of debate? It is our collective demand that they choose to do both immediately. The report is now available for download at armsembargo.ca, and the authors are available for individual interviews throughout the day. Now we turn it over to the members of the gallery for questions.
Good morning, Rafi Bujikanyan, CBC. Your report's demands focus a lot on what the government should do, but do you have any sense of how easy or difficult it is for these individual companies to get out of the contracts they currently have?
So I think the solution here is, written into MP Kwan's bill, which is that there is a transition period for the implementation of the legislation before they need to fulfill it. So it's not 100% necessary for those companies to not fulfill their contracts. They have to apply for a permit. If there's no risk to human rights through the Commission of War Crimes, those permits would be approved by GAC. If there is a risk, the whole point of an arms control system is to prevent arms from going and being used. And contractual law is not supposed to be the priority in this case. The Arms Trade Treaty mandates us to ensure that international law is followed before contractual law.
Thanks. And if I may ask as a follow-up to MP Kwan, what's your sense of how much support you currently have for this bill, especially among the Liberals?
I think there are some members of Parliament who may support the bill from the government side. However, I also think that the government will want to continue to perpetrate the disinformation that they're providing out there. They continue to provide the false narrative that Canada is somehow abiding by the Arms Trade Treaty, when clearly evidence such as this report shows that it is contrary, that Canada is in fact violating the Arms Trade Treaty. And so as long as they continue to hold on to that narrative, they are going to prevent, I think, their members of Parliament in supporting this bill. The truth has to be acknowledged and has to be accepted. And right now, the Prime Minister Carney, has refused to accept that truth. And the Minister Anita Anand, has refused to accept that truth. And so we need to make sure that they stop telling this disinformation to Canadians. The claim that Canada's parts and components and weaponries is not contributing to war crimes and atrocities, especially in Gaza, is simply false. And so this is the moment that we have to acknowledge what is real. And you can't deny the findings of these reports. You can't deny the realities of what's happening. And so when you face that truth, I believe that members of parliament will do the right thing.
Thanks. If I may ask just one unrelated question on the
I'd like
budget
to follow
vote.
up on that before we do unrelated questions.
Sure.
Yeah. I think one of the most important things to note is this bill is being put forward in the absence of much easier government action. GAC today could sign into effect an arms embargo on Israel. GAC today could could change the regulations under the Export and Import Permit Act to eliminate the U.S. loophole. This is simply under Anand's purview, and this whole exercise of going through Parliament is simply because the government has refused to act, and we're trying to narrow the choices they have before it by showing the gaps between Canada's laws and the Arms Trade Treaty. But we always would prefer if GAC under Anita Anand or Mark Carney would step up and just exercise the discretionary power that they have. This is all a very unnecessary exercise, but MP Kwan is providing the moral and ethical leadership right now in the absence of that government activity. We also want to turn it over to Rachel Small to comment on that question before the other ones.
Thank you. Sorry, it's hard not to interject on Zoom. I want to respond to the previous question by also noting that what we saw in response to our last report is that in the context of the government's failure to take immediate action to stop these shipments, we actually saw some of the companies stepping up and making immediate commitments to stop the flow of their weapons to Elbit in Israel. Calian is an example of a major arms contractor and Canadian manufacturer based in the Ottawa area that produces antennas, that following our last report and the light that was shed on their ongoing shipments to Israel's largest weapons company, indeed committed that they would immediately stop all of their shipments to Elbit. This shows us that this is possible, and that even while we wait for decisive government actions, these companies can indeed step up and do what's right and end their complicity in genocide. They remain complicit and can be held legally liable, as the UN has pointed out many times, even in the absence of decisive government action.
Thanks, Rachel and Alex. MP Kwan, I just wanted to ask on the budget. The NDP, of course, say they are opposed to it. I'm just wondering how you can square that with the abstentions from your caucus that helped support the government and ultimately helped ensure that it didn't fall yesterday.
Well, the majority of the NDP caucus did vote against the budget. We have a lot of problems and concerns related to budget. And however, there are two of our members who abstained. And so too, there were two members from the Conservatives who also abstained. And to that end, as our interim leader, Don Davies, has stated very clearly, we don't support the budget. But at the same time, we also recognize that Canadians do not want to see an election. And so we do not want to trigger an election, and that's why the votes came out the way it did.
And if there are no further questions, that will conclude today's press conference. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.